to my daughter, who finally found a man desperate enough. My father's voice boomed through the ballroom, glass raised, a shark-like grin plastered across his face. 60 elite guests went dead silent. It wasn't a joke, it was a public execution of my dignity. I felt Ethan's hand tighten under the table, his body tensing to stand, but I held him back. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I walked to the front of that room, opened my laptop, and projected one single document onto the big screen. When my father's partner, Arthur Higgins, saw the numbers, his champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. That sound? That was the sound of my father's empire collapsing. I'm Karen Miller, a 29-year-old forensic accountant, and I'm about to show you why you should never underestimate the girl you spent a lifetime tearing down. Before we dive into the wreckage, please like and subscribe to From My Heart if you believe in the power of the truth. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening to this story right now? Let me know your location in the comments. Growing up as Robert Miller's daughter didn't feel like childhood. It felt like a 30-year audition for a role I never wanted. To the outside world, my father was the American dream personified. He built Miller and Higgins Construction from a single rusty pickup truck into a multi-million-dollar empire that reshaped the skyline of our town. He was the man who hosted the most lavish 4th of July barbecues, the guy who chaired every local charity gala, and the generous benefactor who bought rounds for the entire country club bar, just to hear the sound of his own name being toasted. But inside our four walls, the atmosphere changed. The moment the front door clicked shut, the Man of the Year mask slipped, and a cold, calculating architect of psychological warfare took its place. My father didn't need to raise his voice to make you feel microscopic. He had this way of speaking in a low, conversational tone that could gut your self-esteem before you even realized you were bleeding. I remember being 9 years old, standing in the kitchen with a report card full of straight A's and a teacher's note calling me a joy to have in class. I presented it to him like a peace offering, hoping for just one good job. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. He just sipped his coffee and said, "Grades don't mean you're smart, Karen. They just mean your teachers feel sorry for you. Don't let it go to your head." I looked at my mother, Susan, sitting across from him. She just stared into her mug, silent as a statue. That was the dynamic. He would cut, and she would watch. Over time, I realized my mother wasn't just a witness. She was a casualty who had long ago traded her voice for the comfort of a marble countertop and a designer handbag. She had learned to fold so many years ago that she didn't know how to stand up straight anymore. This was the golden cage. From the outside, I had everything: the best schools, the summer trips, the pedigree. But inside, I was suffocating. My father only showed pride in me when there was an audience. At my college graduation, where I finished magna cum laude in accounting, he spent the entire celebratory dinner talking to his business partners about a new municipal contract. When the check arrived, he looked at my diploma and joked loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "Well, let's hope this paper is worth more than the tuition I wasted on it." Everyone at the table laughed, including my friends, because when Robert Miller makes a joke, you laugh. It was the tax you paid for being in his orbit. It wasn't until I met Ethan Brooks that I realized the water I was swimming in was toxic. On our third date, I told a funny story about how my father used to make me redo the lawn if the mower lines weren't perfectly straight. I expected a laugh. Instead, Ethan set his fork down, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Karen, that's not a funny story. That's control. You know that's not normal, right?" Something cracked inside me that night. For the first time, someone had held up a mirror that wasn't distorted by my father's ego. Ethan was the opposite of Robert: steady, quiet, and someone who actually listened. But I knew the moment I brought him home, he wouldn't be a guest. He would be my father's next target. My father didn't just want a son-in-law, he wanted a subordinate. And Ethan was the first man I'd ever met who wasn't afraid of the great Robert Miller. In the world of forensic accounting, we have a saying, "People lie, but the numbers never do." Numbers don't have an ego, They don't have a reputation to protect, and they certainly don't care about being the most popular guy at the country club. They just sit there, cold and objective, waiting for someone with enough patience to find the story they're trying to tell. 3 months before the engagement party, I found the story that would break my heart. It was a Tuesday night, and the office was hollow. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC and the distant rhythm of a vacuum cleaner in the hall. I was deep diving into a routine audit for a commercial client when I hit a snag. A limited liability company, LLC, registered in Delaware that kept appearing in the digital margins of various construction subcontracts. It was a ghost. No website, no office, no employees. Just a bank account and a name, Atlas Holdings. My training took over before my emotions could even lace up their boots. I pulled the thread. I spent hours tracing wire transfers through layers of shell companies that were stacked like Russian nesting dolls. My coffee went stone cold as I watched the digital trail lead me away from my client and straight into the private books of Miller and Higgins Construction, my father's firm. I stared at the screen until the pixels burned into my retinas. My father had been siphoning money. Not just a few $1,000s here and there for a clerical error, but a systematic, surgical extraction of funds. Monthly transfers, carefully calculated to stay just below the threshold of automatic internal flags, but substantial enough to fund a life he didn't technically earn. I opened a new, encrypted folder on my personal laptop. I named it Project Atlas. Over the next several weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. I'd come home from my day job, kiss Ethan, and then disappear into the glow of my screen until 3 a.m. I was a daughter by day and a hunter by night. I tracked every penny. The $837,000 total didn't just represent stolen cash. It represented a decade of calculated betrayal. This wasn't just money stolen from a company. It was stolen from Arthur Higgins, a man who had stood by my father for 15 years, a man who treated my father like a brother. The auditor in me was fascinated by the precision of the fraud. The daughter in me was vomiting in the bathroom. I finally sat Ethan down on a rainy Tuesday night. I showed him the spreadsheets, the clean, clinical proof of my father's shadow life. Ethan read the report with the silent intensity of a trial lawyer. When he finished, he didn't look at the numbers. He looked at me. "Karen," he said softly, "Arthur Higgins thinks your father is his best friend. He's the godfather to Arthur's kids. This isn't just white-collar crime. This is a betrayal of everything Arthur believes in." He was right. My father was using Arthur's trust as a piggy bank to fund his man-of-the-year lifestyle. The boat, the vintage cars, the very champagne he was planning to serve at my engagement party. My plan was simple: compile the final report, wait until the Monday after the party, and hand it to Arthur face to face. Professional, private, clean. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want a public execution. I just wanted the truth to be out so I could finally stop breathing the toxic air of my father's lies. I didn't know then that my father was already sharpening a knife of his own for my engagement night. I was bringing a laptop filled with facts. He was bringing a toast filled with poison. The Whitfield Ballroom was a masterpiece of manufactured perfection. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, forgiving glow over 60 guests. The scent of expensive orchids filled the air, and a string quartet played something soft and classical in the corner. It was exactly the kind of stage my father, Robert Miller, loved. A room full of people he could impress, or intimidate, or both. I sat at table 1, dressed in a cream silk gown that felt like a straitjacket. Ethan sat beside me, his presence the only thing keeping me grounded. Across from us sat Arthur and Martha Higgins. Arthur was laughing at one of my father's stories, his face full of genuine warmth for the man he called his brother. Seeing that trust made the laptop bag stashed under my chair feel like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Dinner was a blur of expensive wine and my father's greatest hits, stories of my childhood failures repackaged as dinner theater. He laughed as he told the room how I'd failed my first driving test, how I'd nearly burned the house down trying to cook eggs at 10, how my first boyfriend ran for the hills after 3 months. The table laughed along. My mother, Susan, gave her practiced, haunting smile. The air in the room felt thin, like the oxygen was being sucked out by my father's massive ego. At 8:15 p.m., the room went quiet. Robert Miller stood up. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket, picked up a silver spoon, and tapped his champagne flute. Ting, ting, ting. The sound of a predator calling the pack to order. "I'd like to raise a glass to my daughter, Karen," he began, scanning the room with his showman's eyes. Even then, after 29 years of evidence, a small, broken part of me hoped. I thought, maybe, just this once, he'll say he's proud. "For 29 years," he continued, his voice dropping into that warm, paternal tone he used for public consumption. "I've watched this girl struggle with school, struggle with her career, and struggle with every relationship that didn't quite work out." The heat rushed to my face. I could feel 60 pairs of eyes shifting toward me, some with pity, some with awkward amusement. "I'll be honest," he said, leaning in like he was sharing a secret with the whole room. "There were times I wasn't sure anyone would stick around long enough to figure her out." He paused, his grin widening into something jagged and cruel. Then he raised his glass high and delivered the line he'd been sharpening all week. "So tonight, I want to toast to Karen, who finally found a man desperate enough." He let out a big, booming laugh, expecting the room to join him. But the silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. No one laughed. A woman at a nearby table covered her mouth. Arthur Higgins stared at his plate, the smile wiped clean from his face. Ethan's chair creaked as he started to rise, his jaw like granite. I reached out and gripped his arm, my fingers digging into his sleeve. "Don't," I whispered, my voice cold and clear. "I've got this." My father's grin faltered, just for a second, as he realized the room had turned on him. "Oh, come on," he said, trying to recover. "It's a joke. Karen knows I love her. Right, sweetheart?" I looked at him. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. The fear that had lived in my chest for 3 decades simply evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, professional resolve. "Sit down, Dad," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. "Karen, don't be dramatic." I said, "Sit down." The room gasped. My father, stunned by the sudden shift in gravity, actually sat. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I didn't look at the guests. I walked straight to the AV table. I pulled the laptop from my bag and plugged it into the projector my father had set up to show family photos. "My father just told 60 people that no man would willingly marry me," I said, my voice echoing through the surround sound system. "I think it's only fair that these same 60 people know who Robert Miller really is." I clicked a button. The screen lit up, not with childhood photos, but with the cold, hard reality of Project Atlas. The first slide was a header in bold, black text: Forensic Audit Summary. Unauthorized fund transfers. The sound of Arthur Higgins's champagne glass shattering against the marble floor was the only music left in the room. The silence that followed the shattering of Arthur Higgins' glass was heavier than the noise that preceded it. On the giant projector screen, the numbers for Project Atlas stood like soldiers, orderly, unyielding, and devastating. I scrolled through the pages, showing a decade of deception in high definition. Every unauthorized transfer, every shell company, every dollar that had been bled from the partnership was laid bare for 60 people to witness. My father, Robert Miller, scrambled to his feet. The man of the year was gone. In his place was a cornered animal. "This is a lie," he barked, his voice cracking as it hit the high notes of desperation. "She's unstable. She's doing this because of a joke. Arthur, you know me." I turned to face him, my hands steady on the podium. "I'm a certified fraud examiner, Dad. This isn't an opinion. This is a trail, and it leads directly to you." Arthur Higgins didn't shout. He didn't even stand up. He just looked at the screen, then at the man he had trusted for 15 years. His face had gone a ghostly shade of gray. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice trembling with a quiet, lethal fury. "I need you at the office Monday morning. Bring the forensic team. It's over. The room began to empty. It wasn't a dramatic rush for the exits. It was a slow, deliberate withdrawal. People grabbed their coats and avoided my father's eyes like he was a contagious ghost. No one stopped to shake his hand. No one said goodbye. They just vanished. My mother, Susan, remained in her seat. She didn't look at the screen, and she didn't look at my father. She looked at her hands. When Robert turned to her, his final play was a plea. Susan, tell them our daughter has lost her mind. For the first time in 30 years, the woman who had learned to fold finally stood up straight. She looked him in the eyes and said 7 words that ended it all. You did this to yourself, Robert, not her. 6 months later, the world looked very different. The independent audit confirmed every cent of the $837,000 I had found. The Miller and Higgins empire didn't just crumble, it was dismantled piece by piece. My father lost the lake house, the vintage cars, and the respect he had spent a lifetime buying. He was removed from the country club board and relegated to a small, sterile apartment on the edge of town, where the only person he could control was the reflection in the mirror. Ethan and I got married on a rainy Sunday in his parents' backyard. There were only 15 guests. There was no projector, no seating chart, and no one toasted to anyone's desperation. We drank beer from cans and ate burgers from the grill. Halfway through the night, a delivery arrived, a massive bouquet of peonies with a card that read, "To Karen, the bravest truth-teller I know. Congratulations, Arthur and Martha Higgins." I leaned my head on Ethan's shoulder and let out a breath I'd been holding since I was 9 years old. I'm not a hero. I didn't plan a grand takedown for the sake of drama. I was just a woman who decided that the cost of silence had become too high. If you're watching this and you're sitting at a table where you're being made to feel small, remember this. Setting a boundary with your family doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you love yourself enough to refuse the poison. Loyalty ends where betrayal begins. I'm Karen Miller, and the truth was finally enough. If this story moved you, please drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose between your family's secrets and your own integrity? Just type, "I choose me," if you're ready to stand in your own truth. I'll see you in the next story.